Welcome to The View magazine's Rebel Justice podcast. The View is the only platform by and for women in the justice system. We want you to think about what justice really means, who it serves, and who it leaves behind. This is episode 73, part 2 of our conversation with global activist, author, and founder of Daughters for Earth, Zainab Salbi. In this episode, we explore a powerful question: can care be a form of climate action? She opens up about how burnout prompted her to reconnect with nature and inspired a new mission, supporting women-led climate solutions rooted in healing and restoration. It's a hopeful, heartwarming episode about healing, from war, from disconnection, and from environmental harm. We hope you enjoy.
Well, Daughters for Earth is a philanthropic fund that supports women on the front lines of addressing climate change and biodiversity loss. It also celebrates the women. We turn them into graphic novels, turn their stories based on the Hummingbird Effect story. And then we celebrate their work. We give feedback to the readers or to the supporters of why their work is actually important. Not many people know that protecting mangroves is part of climate change solutions, that protecting wild animals is part of climate change solutions, that protecting these endangered species is part of climate change. Not many people know that rewilding your ground, your lawn, not putting any pesticides in it is part of climate change solution. That these basics, that if you dig deep and you're studying it, you'll learn that these are basics. But on a mass mainstream level, not many people know that these are solutions. So we find the women, we support them financially, we then turn their stories into graphic novels that everyone can get virtually by just going to daughtersforearth.org, and not only reading the story in an engaging way, but learning these scientific tips and getting tips of what can you do in your own personal life to be able to be part of the solution. So, and I'll end with, the whole thing that we base Daughters for Earth story on, which is an African fable called the Hummingbird Effect, which is about a forest fire which took over the fire, and the animals panicked and, did not know what to do except for a tiny hummingbird. She rushed to the local river, she took a drop of water, and she rushed to the fire and dropped it on top of the fire, and kept on going back and forth fiercely. The other animals looked at her and criticizing her and saying, "But you're just a small drop. You're a small hummingbird, your small beak. You can never turn off the fire with that." And she looked at them and said, "But I'm doing everything I can to turn off the fire. Why don't you join me?" And with that, she inspired all the animals to join in their own drops of water. You carry whatever you can. And surely they did turn off the fire. And I look at the story, we all at Daughters for Earth team look at the story and say, we all are the hummingbirds. We don't have to wait for someone to invent some technology to say technology is not going to save us out of that. We already have the solutions, right? And the solution takes will, takes money, takes willpower, takes political change, but ultimately it really takes all of us to change. We are the people, and we are with the ones with the ultimate power if we only decide to discipline ourselves and say the earth priority and the health of earth is the most important thing for us, more than our daily consumption behaviors or whatever it is that we go about, all of us in our lives, right? So it is about the power of the individual, and it's about the power of the drop of water, and that drop of action does make a difference. And it's been only 3 years since we founded Daughters for Earth, and we've supported about 200 women-led efforts in 50 countries around the world. And now we are measuring the impact and in the millions of acres that they have protected and restored and shifted to regenerative agriculture, the thousands of species they were part of protecting. And we're just starting, in measuring some of that impact.
Wow, yeah, that's so Interesting. I love that story about the hummingbird. It's such a nice one. I find I've done work with other NGOs before that are also founded on small parables or stories. I think it's such a nice way, specifically in relation to what the work you do with the climate, to pull on a story like that, which is so grounded in like nature and like symbiotic relationships between individuals and organisms and the earth. I was wondering, actually, building on that, because I was going to ask you to explain the hummingbird effect, which you've obviously just done. But I was wondering myself, what are examples that you could provide, even me, like, of those small actions that can be taken each day, like in the day to day life?
Well, I would say the first thing I would do is connect to what's happening to the nature around you, even if you live in a city, but check out your country or your province or your city or whatever. Check out what's going on in it, So it could be, for me, it could be anywhere from really understanding where in your country has to shift in terms of policies, in terms of productions, in terms of where the part of nature that needs to be protected, what species are endangered in your country or in your city, who are the other people who are doing it. Like, these are for me just basics, right? But then you can go longer, you can go much more. Depends, right? So I can tell you, in my lifestyle, honestly, I have very little food waste. I compose all the little food waste. So it's shifting small behavior, right? From, being conscious about your food waste, being conscious about your water waste. It's like just consciousness. It doesn't even take, these are minuscule. Like, I
Yeah.
never let any water to go to waste anymore. I'm like constantly, or the food, even the leftover of food, as I peel my onion, I boil it and do something with it, right? So there's constantly waste. It depends on also where you live. My toothbrush, how much plastic in our toothbrush or in our floss. So now I actually go out of my way and research what toothbrushes that are more environmentally sustainable, what floss packages that are more environmentally sustainable, what garbage bags are more environmentally sustainable. If you live in a countryside, don't put pesticides in your grounds, for example.
Yeah.
So these are their basic behavior, from the kind of garbage bag that we need to shift to buying, for one that does not decompose to one that decompose into earth, right? To the kind of the basic plastics that we are using in our daily lives. I mean, it's all over us, right?
Yeah.
To the fashion. I mean, as I love fashion, I love clothes, but the discipline I impose on myself of before I buy anything, I ask, is this sustainable production? Is this
Yeah.
ethical? How did you source it? Who are the farmers? How did you pay it? Most people don't understand these answers. Most sales agents don't understand. But I then do my research about the fashion companies, and if I love a shirt that is not sustainable, it is my duty to say, I have to not buy it, right? It's
Yeah.
just an option and it's a choice. And living consistently does have some discipline in it, right? It doesn't, and they are amazing, beautiful things that are sustainable that we can give them a chance. So it's a mindset, it's a shift, right? And the shift
Yeah.
goes from what are the species in my country or in my town or my city or village to what are the actions that I am doing that are contributing to also advocacy. One of the most important deterrents to companies is regulations. It's actually less consumer behavior, unfortunately, because apparently a lot of consumers don't care, but it's regulations, right? So
Yeah.
less, I mean, you can be the one that advocates to regulations in your, again, city, town, government, country, doesn't matter, because that is number one best deterrent for companies,
Yeah.
or incentives rather to shift their behavior
Yeah.
towards a more ethical, more kinder way towards earth.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess we're seeing that now. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of all of this, but in like specifically in recent years, pushes towards a lot more regulation on corporations' behaviors with regards to the environment, social impact, etc. So I guess we can hope that all that legislation comes to have an impact that we can see on corporations' behaviors and impact across the globe. I guess actually kind of following on from that, I was wondering, this is a question I was going to ask later on, but it flows quite nicely now. If you could implement any policy or legal changes in any country in a very idealistic way, you have all the power to support climate activists and ensure environmental justice, what do you think that would have to be?
That's a very good question, and I don't feel I'm equipped to answer it, to be honest, because I'm not a
Okay.
policy-oriented person. Um, but and without being a policy-oriented someone, the first thing I honestly would prioritize is conservation efforts of land and water and
Okay.
biodiversity protection. That would be, if I was in politics, that would be the first thing I would. This is mapped. The scientists have mapped each country what it needs to conserve, right? So I would do
Mm-hmm.
this as one of the first regulation. The second regulation would be shifting to regenerative agriculture. A lot of that means supporting a lot of local farmers in their shift to regenerative agriculture. That simply means the health of the soil is the most essential thing, basically,
Okay.
to the way we farm, because healthy soil is a very important factor in carbon sequestering, and unhealthy soil becomes carbon sink. And so we need to keep the healthiness of, let's say, this individual, if you look at soil as individual, to keep on performing.
Yeah.
And the way we're doing right now is making healthy someone sick, and
Yeah.
that sickness adds to the pressure of the illness itself rather than solve it, right? Do you see what I mean? And so
Yeah.
these are basic things that I would advocate for as one of the first things. But
Okay.
again, I'm not an expert in that.
No, but again, it's just interesting because everyone brings a different perspective based on their background and work. So,
Yeah.
like, it's very interesting to hear what you, even if you're not in policy, what you have this to say about that. This is slightly foraying into like the views, like remit, wherein we're obviously concerned a lot with criminal justice and women impacted by the justice system. But in the UK, there's recently been legislation passed allowing climate activists to be prosecuted under anti-terrorism laws, and we're seeing similar like changes happen specifically in the US and across the globe. I was wondering what you believe is driving this, or if you have any thoughts as to what is driving this crackdown on climate activists, and what do you think it signals for the future of climate activism?
Do not stop the activism. No people who want about any changes in the world, from ending slavery to ending to trying to get equality for women, have done that without any suffering and
Yeah,
persecution. People are afraid of change. People feel threatened by change. And
yeah,
so those who are leading change are not to change in their values, but maybe adopt, change in their strategies, in their style, and whatever. All of us, I believe there is no such a thing as good activism and bad activism. I think the ecosystem of activism is all good, between those who are very loud and those who are and demonstrating, and those who are tactful and sitting at the negotiating tables and negotiating. All are part of an ecosystem to try to change a system. And
yeah,
that ecosystem requires everyone to engage in different ways. It all helps lead to the change. And so it comes back to being change entails fear and entails threats, basically, to the status quo.
yeah,
And I would say, so don't change. This is important. This is about the future. It's about our life. It's about humans, to be honest. It's about the well-being of humanity and our future humanity, right?
yeah,
Because Earth is going to survive. It's just us, we're not going to survive, right?
yeah,
So, but I would also value the different meanings of activism. Often we think activism as just going on demonstrations. And
hmm,
for me, a lawyer who is sitting and negotiating at the negotiating tables for regulations in her suit is equally an activist, even if she doesn't look like an activist. The activism, and a journalist who is reporting on stories that is important, is equally an activist. We cannot narrow the meaning of activism into only meaning certain things, right? I think we
Yeah.
need to look widen the meaning of activism. I think a spiritual leader who is meditating and talking about their connections to Earth is also an activist for Earth, right? So we
Yeah.
are to widen the meaning of activism, and we are to explore what is real for us and how it resonates for us rather than narrow it down as only one thing. And that widening of that meaning, that organizing and coordinating with other activists, as I said, the lawyers and the spiritual leader and everyone, that helps us change or accomplish the change we are asking for.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting actually. It's a thing I have encountered a lot just in my like brief experience, but amongst the left, amongst people trying to fight for justice and equality, like etc., there does seem to be often this conflict between what is right and wrong and what's productive and what's reductive, etc. And yeah, that's like I agree with you, and that's like lovely to hear that articulated, that actually in this expansive sense of what it is to be an activist and contribute, everyone has their part. And as you say, like if it's an ecosystem consisting of different people and different professions, then comes together in this symbiotic way where everyone can be fighting in a different way towards one cause.
And we have to be compassionate to each other. We can't
Yeah.
strive to get better treatment of Earth when we are harsh on each other and we're critical of each other and when we are destroying each other.
Yeah.
This climate change crisis requires us to collaborate. And so if we cannot collaborate at the basic of our actions, then we are doing the opposite thing. Earth collaborates, nature collaborates between the different species and the different trees, and we need to learn collaboration much more than conquesting or
Yeah.
judgmental or whatever. And that everyone is guilty of, you know, everyone. And so for me is we're all here on the same boat, trying to do the same thing. Well, we need to be more compassionate to each other as we all advocate for Earth. And how do we sometimes kindness has more impact in creating change, and kind style has more impact in creating change than the loud, forceful one. And sometimes loud, forceful one. That's what I'm saying. I don't have judgment of which one, but I have
Yeah.
judgment of the judgment itself that we
Yeah.
cannot judge each other. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. Another thought I had while you were speaking previously as well, kind of reflecting on my own question of the crackdown in climate activists and legislation and policing, etc., is if you, I was just thinking based on what you were saying, if I reflect back throughout history on the suffragettes, for example, and the violence with which they were met and how they were imprisoned and really policed in quite an aggressive, violent way, and the anti-slavery movement producing the Civil War in the States and across. So to your point, like all movements that are worthwhile and fighting a big structural injustice have big opposition to them, and that's always been the way. So I suppose it would be bizarre if that wasn't continuing on now, in how people are treating climate activists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
Um, I suppose a final question I would have is just potentially two parts, but what does success look like to you in the long term of climate justice, and what would you hope for future generations and the world they would inherit?
That's a very good question. I think each one of us will define it differently. Obviously, for us to truly solve climate change, in my opinion, and the loss of biodiversity, at the bottom of it, at the center of it, we need to change our relation with our economy, I think, right? With the meaning of consumption.
Yeah.
uh, and how we go about consumption, right? So that cannot continue. That the industrialization that we're going through, or the consume without thoughtfulness in buying and what we're using, it's just really destructive, right? So for
Yeah.
me, that is at the essence um, of what is the change that ultimately we need to do. So I'm not saying no consumption or no production,
Yeah.
but I'm saying it's a shift of how we use and what we use, and understanding that this is a symbiotic relationship of a give and take with Mother Earth, right? That is that era of just extract without thinking that there is a limit, can't,
Yeah.
I mean, just it can't, right? So the fundamentals of that is that, in my opinion. And
Yeah.
that requires shifts for all of us, basically, right? Um, so that's, I don't know if I answered your question, but it's hard because everyone
No.
will have a different perspective at it. For me, that is the fundamentals for me. And all, but on the short term success for me, I don't know if we'll accomplish it, but that women's leadership will be much. I actually really believe if women are included at the decision making tables of not only how do we solve the issue on different sectors, from the economy to politics to um, our relationships with resources to our policies to our, if we put more women at the table, some of them are going to be good, some of them are going to be bad, right? The good and the bad and the ugly exist with women and men, but that a different perspective that women bring are important, and
Yeah.
that giving more attention that we are currently having to females perspective is actually very important in shifting their paradigm of how we are thinking. And
Yeah.
that we in shift, and in the meantime we just got to support, we just, I mean, as the world feels to distract itself from climate change, we need to put more energy in those who are on the front lines of protecting and conserving the earth. I mean, that's my biggest worry right now. So success on the short term is just making sure that these efforts of conservation, biodiversity protection, regenerative agriculture are supported to last, because they're sort of doing it for all of us. It's not for community X or Y. It's really for all of us. And for the sure, until the world change, which the economic change may, I don't know what it will take.
Yeah.
Until that happen, we need to put a lot of energy and attention to the current work of conservation and biodiversity protection. And for me, because they're less corrupt and more efficient, and that means putting more energy and more resources in the hands of women who are doing that work.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I suppose I wouldn't have necessarily thought of it in this way, but what that made me think is that in the short term success is just via women, but in general just the inclusion of a different perspective, in that the world as it is today has been created by one very specific perspective being enforced massively on the rest of the globe. So to shift that power dynamic will bring about a shift if it's gendered or cultural, etc.
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah, and that made me think. Also, I think I am not very much a expert in any capacity with the environment, but if I were to think about how the modern world was very much structured by the like symbiotic processes of colonization and the development of capitalism and the exploitative relationship with the land that engendered, and also destroying this way of living that people once did throughout the world, of living with the land and in a like regenerative, as you say, like kind way, that actually it's the way our current economic system works and was enforced on the world's nations and societies. It's that needs to be changed and overturned. So I suppose I would agree with you in that sense, and definitely answers the question.
It's just we need to connect instead of disconnect,
Yeah.
basically, you know, with earth, with each other, frankly, you know,
Yeah.
and with nature in a different way than that we have been. And we, like, the whole individualization process needs to,
Yeah.
in my opinion, be based on or shift to reconnection with our hearts, with each other, with nature, as a way and as part of the solution.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rebel Justice podcast. Zainab's story is a powerful reminder that justice for women is deeply connected to justice for the earth. You can support The View magazine, a social enterprise that receives no government funding, by subscribing for just £20 a year. That includes 4 digital issues and 1 print edition. Follow us on our social media, and thanks for listening. Let us know what you think.